Hi, this is my disciplinary literacy project. And for my project, I went to State Farm and I interviewed one of their secretaries there. Her name is Lucilia, and she is the woman in the white shirt. And then they have like an intern, and her name is Julia, and that's her in the gray shirt there. So I decided to go to State Farm and do this because it's kind of hard actually to think of where language lives in the real world. It seems like something easy that you would be able to find. Oh crap. There. It seems like something easy that you would be able to find, but it's not like, you're studying biology and then you become a biologist. You don't study Spanish and then become a Spanish. Like, you just go out there and speak it. So it's hard to find. Nobody's job is just, my job is to speak Spanish. So, I wanted to find somebody who was bilingual and who would use that language in their day-to-day job, and who actually was hired because they had that skill set. So yeah, Lucilia is, she's actually multilingual. She is Portuguese. She was born in Portugal and, came over here to the United States as a child, so she's fluent in Portuguese. She doesn't use that as much, though, but she is also fluent in Spanish, and then obviously in English. So this is one of her quotes that she had. It says, "I think that being culturally aware is a skill all students should graduate with," and I obviously agree with that. I think that's something that even is missed a lot in language classes, because in language classes, a lot of the focus is on 100% like grammar, and vocabulary, which obviously are important, but we don't talk a lot about culture. Some classes do. Like when I went to U-High, there was a strong emphasis on culture there, and they actually had in their tests, they would have to write essays based on prompts about culture. But I remember that in my Spanish classes, which were at Normal Community, just, down the road basically, we would have like a party for Cinco de Mayo, or we would have random things like that, but we didn't really talk much about cultural values and different customs and how to actually interact with people from the other culture, because it's one thing to know the language and to be able to communicate with them, but it's another thing to use that language in a way that is appropriate for whatever setting you're in. So to start, I've decided to kind of do this through the lens of the Standards for World Language Literacy, which is run by, it's called ACTFL, it's the American Council for Teaching Foreign Languages. So it's kind of complicated. It's this whole web. It's broken into 5 kind of big branches here, and each branch has 2 to 3. Most of them have 2 little kind of sub things. So this is what I am supposed to think about whenever I'm designing a lesson plan or designing an activity, is being able to incorporate all 5 of these every single day into every single lesson. And that can be kind of a daunting task because, as you can see, there's a lot in here. And actually even these these lighter pink subcategories also have their own subcategories. So it's like this huge web. So I thought that during my interview I could break it down a little bit and see what she had to say about each of the larger categories, and just to kind of illustrate those larger ones in an easier way. We have world language literacy, which is achieved by studying communication, cultures, connections, comparisons, and communities, or the 5 C's. So I asked her specific questions about those. So to start, we have here, this is communication, which is made up of interpersonal, interpretive, and presentational. And this was probably the easiest one for her to come up with why her job relates to this. She said that obviously she practices communication when she speaks Spanish. So she will have people, she works for somebody who's higher up in State Farm, and they will have people come to visit or come to have meetings, and a lot of times these people do speak Spanish. And a lot of times she said these people actually are bilingual, being high up in a company in America, a lot of times kind of warrants that you are able to speak English. But she said that when these people come in, she can tell when they're bilingual and when they're more comfortable speaking Spanish. And as somebody who's kind of in the front lines there, and the person who they meet first, a lot of times she can tell when they would be more comfortable speaking Spanish. Like, so for example, when she's telling them how to get to a certain area of the office, or when she's telling them, wait 5 minutes and then someone will come out and see you. So when it's not those super professional settings where those people probably are speaking English with Lucilia's boss, she can tell when they're more comfortable speaking Spanish. So she uses that in a way to communicate more day-to-day things with them. And then obviously if they speak in English to her first, she'll just respond in English. But yep. And that kind of goes back to interpretive in here too, that little subcategory, because she's able to interpret when it's more appropriate to use Spanish and when it's more appropriate to use English. So moving on. Oh, yep, and then that's the main goal. Communicate effectively in more than one language in order to function in a variety of situations and for multiple purposes. So yep, she's able to decipher when she's able to use the language in various situations. Next up, we have culture, and this is made up of relating cultural practices to perspectives and relating cultural products to perspectives equals culture. And her main thing with this, she actually had a story about when they had Japanese people come, and she does not know Japanese. She cannot speak it, but she had to learn beforehand how to interact with people who are natives from Japan. And something interesting is that they usually put out food, like little snack items and like coffee and whatnot, for visitors when they come and for people when they're coming for meetings. But she did some research online and found out that that is actually not customary in Japan, and she didn't want to make them uncomfortable or anything, so she did not put out food at all. And that's something that she said was really different for her, but she was able to do that just based on her research of the Japanese culture. And the main goal there is to interact with cultural competence and understanding. And that goes back to her quote at the beginning about what she thinks all students should graduate with, is the ability to, obviously, you can't graduate knowing how to interact with every single culture in the world. But if you can graduate knowing how to at least navigate major cultures that you'll run into, so Hispanic cultures and Asian cultures, that's a good skill to have. But then also the skill, which I'll talk about a little bit later, to do your own research beforehand. So the next learning target is connections, and that's made up of making connections and acquiring information in diverse perspectives. And this is what I was talking about with the ability to research beforehand. So obviously, you're not going to know every single culture. That's not a goal that any high school should have, but they can kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Impart the knowledge needed in order to look up cultures on your own. So you should be able to have those research skills and know what to search and know how to come about like valid information and information that's credible about different cultures. So you can't just search, what are Asian people like, and expect to come back with very reliable sources on that. But being able to decipher what's credible and what's not, is not only in languages, but just in school in general, is something that I think schools try to teach, but oftentimes aren't very good at it, because you see people coming to college and they're still using these like random wikis that are made for like a second grade classroom, like random things like that people cite, and being able to decipher real information about different cultures and fake information is something that's important, and it's something that Lucilia uses when she knows she's going to come into contact with a culture that she's not familiar with. So the next, connect with other disciplines and acquire information in diverse perspectives in order to use the language to function in academic and career-related situations. So that's acquiring that information on your own. The fourth learning target here is comparisons, and that includes language and cultural comparisons. And this one was kind of covered already. She's able to look at different cultures that she comes into contact with and make comparisons between them. So she knows that, let's say it's two different, she's talking to people who each speak Spanish. One of them might be from Bolivia and one of them might be from Mexico. And she knows that even within this own language, there's different customs and there's different ways in which they act in different situations. And even just knowing the language is not enough to appropriately communicate with each of them. Like, yes, they might understand you, but you need to make sure that if you are in an actual career setting in which you're using this language and you're expected to use this language, it's not enough just to know, like, donde está el baño? Like, that's not enough. You need to be able to know how to interact with different subsections of the language. And develop insight into the nature of language and culture in order to interact with cultural competence. So you're not always going to use the language in the same way in every situation you're in, or with every person from different countries who speak that language. And finally, I'm running out of time here, is communities. That includes school and global communities, and then they also kind of group together lifelong learning in here. And her major thing with this, and here's a little thing, communicate and interact with cultural competence in order to participate in multilingual communities at home and around the world. So her major thing with this was, obviously she's participating in a community because she works and uses the language, but there's also the lifelong learning aspect. And right now she said she wants to kind of tackle the Romance languages first because that's the easiest thing to do. So she knows Portuguese, she knows Spanish, she wants to start learning Italian. And then another long-term goal for her, she said, was to learn either Japanese or Chinese. And she said that that would be completely different from her and very difficult, but she thinks that, lifelong learning is a huge, important aspect of being someone in her career in general. You never want to just stop and plateau and stop learning. So she takes it really seriously and wants to continue bettering herself so that she can do her job even better with even more people. So that is my project. Thanks for listening.